Hello, and welcome to this episode of Character Forge. My name is Tyler Owens, your character smith, and joining us again with her artistic talents is my lovely wife, LEigh.
Hello.
So far on the show, we've built a character for each class in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, as well as a few others like a ridiculously multi-classing orc and a mostly random sorcerer. While there's still a lot we could do with 5th edition, I think we're going to move on to another system to shake things up. Now, we own or have access to 6 tabletop RPG systems, and we'll likely get to all of them eventually. But there was one that I knew I wanted to do first after 5th edition, and that's the Mistborn Adventure Game. If you don't know, the Mistborn series is a series of books by Brandon Sanderson. If you haven't read them, I would highly recommend reading at least the first book before listening to this chunk of episodes to see if you like the books. I'm going to try to avoid spoiling too much, but just the nature of the RPG system, there are things that are going to be spoiled, and the books are really good, and learning about the world and its magic slowly throughout the series is part of the magic of the series. Seriously, at least give it a try before you continue.
It's one of our all-time favorite series ever.
Yes, which is why we got the tabletop system for it. The Mistborn Adventure Game is a tabletop RPG system specifically designed to play in the setting of the Mistborn novels. Shocker, I know. It's an interesting system as far as tabletop RPGs go. It's a D6 system. All you need are regular 6-sided dice to play. About 10 per player, to be exact. Now, we're not going to go super in-depth with how the mechanics work, because we're just talking about building the characters, but we should talk about how challenges and checks work. So when the narrator, that's what the DM is called in this system, calls for a roll, what you do is you add together your relevant attributes, traits, and item bonuses to decide how many d6s you get to roll. This can be as few as 2 or as many as 10. Now, most D6 systems that I've seen, the point is to roll and get high numbers. Like a 5 and a 6 will be considered a success, and a 1 and a 2 will be a failure, and then 3 and 4 is just neutral. And then you count up how many successes and failures you got, and you do it that way. That's not how this system works. How this system works is you want to roll a high pair, which is why you can never roll less than 2 dice, because there has to always be a chance that you can roll a pair. So 6s, when you roll, are set aside as a special way to boost success or mitigate failures. And then your outcome on the roll is determined by your highest pair after you've removed the 6s. So if you roll 2 3s and 3 5s, you get a 5. And if you roll 1 3 and 7 5s, you still get a 5. Higher dice pools obviously give you a better chance of getting more 6s and also a higher pair. You can still run into some problems with this system, though, which is why I have mixed feelings about it. You can roll, say, if you're rolling 10 dice, which is like a huge pool, you could roll technically a 3, a 4, a 5, and then 7 6s. I mean, it'd be unlikely, but it could happen. And that would mean that you would actually fail the check, because you don't have any pairs, because 6s are special and outside. So in some instances, getting 6s is actually worse than not having any 6s. So it's a weird system. It's workable. It's definitely not my favorite, but it gets the job done for the most part.
I love this system. Mostly has to do with the fact that the books are awesome.
Yeah. In our limited experience getting to play it, the system, it's a little less predictable or reliable, if you'd rather put it in those terms, than other systems I've played. You get more of a swing between your roles, And, I mean, honestly, that kind of fits the setting anyway, so make of it what you will. Building a character in the Mistborn RPG is actually pretty simple. It's one of the things I like the most about the system, honestly.
It's really fun, too.
So, my first tabletop experience ever was with D&D 3.5. Now, don't get me wrong, 3.5 is a great system. But for a first-time ever player, character creation can be a bit much.
Like a nightmare?
Yeah. I mean, I've run into more complicated systems than 3.5. I mean, I've read the GURPS rulebook. So, you know, there's definitely things more complicated than 3.5. But 3.5 as an introduction to you know, tabletop RPG can be a little overwhelming. But Mistborn... The Mistborn character creation process is one of the easiest systems to build a character that still keeps enough customization options to keep the characters interesting. Because I've played with systems that have simpler character creation, but by and large that leads to characters not being as interesting because you just don't have as many options to work with. So let's jump into how you build a character in this system. The rule book for the game lists 5 steps to create a character. And this is actually one of the things that I think is really interesting about this system. Because step 1 is actually to start out with the party rather than the characters individually. And your party is called your crew in this game. The idea is to avoid a situation where the characters all just meet at a bar and are like, hey, you look like an adventurer, let's go adventuring.
Just remember the gamers, right? Hello there, you fine, upstanding wizard-looking fellow, you. You guys have never met. Would you like to join our party? I sure would. I have been looking for a party. You guys... Okay, you join, whatever. Yeah,
so this is specifically... Starting with the crew is specifically designed to avoid that. Because if you've read the novels... The world of Mistborn is one where the tiniest mistakes can lead to brutal death, and because of this, people only really work with those they have some degree of ability to trust. Like, you'll have to work with other people that you don't trust, but like your crew that you work with, you have to be able to trust, because even tiny mistakes can lead to brutal death. So building the crew first ensures that the group has a reason to work together. It doesn't mean that everyone always gets along. It doesn't mean there aren't, you know, struggles within the crew. But it does mean that everyone has a reason to be loyal to the group and work together. So let's start with the crew. And over the next few episodes, we'll fill it out with what the characters are going to be. To make a crew in the Mistborn Adventure Game, you and your crew need to answer 3 questions. What is your crew's common cause? Who is your primary target? And what is your preferred method? So I think we're going to build a group that's a little different from what most players would be likely to do in the setting. If you're familiar with the setting, it's kind of geared towards people building a ska thieving crew. And it's just kind of, those are the main characters in the books.
If you refuse to read the books, ska are peasantry. Not
Yes.
just any peasantry, but like literally the possessions, the property of the nobility, who are mostly asterisk the only other people, and like they can do literally whatever. It's legal to do whatever you want to them, whatever you want to them. Although there's a few exceptions to. I mean, if you kill too many of your ska, then that's bad.
Well, yeah, because they're all technically the possession of the Lord Ruler, and just.
He's the evil overlord who won.
Yeah.
So I mean, you shouldn't be like slaughtering them wholesale. That's wrong. But aside from that, you can do whatever you want to them.
Yeah. So, given that most people would be building ska thieving crews, I think we're going to build a group of noblemen who work for the Lord Ruler to track down and eliminate ska mistings in Luthadel. So, mistings are kind of magic users. Ska mistings are not supposed to exist.
Totally illegal.
Totally illegal.
That's one of the asterisks. If you have sex with one of the ska, you need to make sure that ska, if a woman does not conceive, because that would result probably and a magic user, and that's illegal.
Yeah. So where most people would be playing ska thieving crews, which probably have ska mistings in them, we're going to be playing the people who track them down and kill them. That's right, we're going to be the baddies. And there's a bit more nuance to my concept for them than that, as there almost always is in the world of Mistborn, but that's the concept we're starting out with. So that gives us our primary target, ska mistings. For our preferred method, we're going to put down infiltration. The group infiltrates ska thieving crews, as the ska thieving crews are often going to have at least one or two mistings in them. Not always, but it's one of the best ways to find them. As for the common cause, we're going to go that it's honestly a thing about survival. Somewhere back in the past of the house, there was, that the characters hail from, the house was led by a man who liked his ska women and wasn't very careful about the aftermath. The obligators found out about this. That's the Spanish Inquisition, basically, is the obligators. They found out about this, and the inquisitors slaughtered him, as they like to do. But
there's a very special death for people who make ska mistings.
Yeah.
It's pretty terrible.
Thing is, it had been going on for long enough that the death of this guy wasn't enough. His family was tasked with cleaning up his mistakes, and if ever a year goes by without them rounding up enough bounties, their whole house's lives are on the line. So they hunt ska mistings in penance for creating so many ska mistings, and even though by this point in history, there's probably still some descendants of the guy, but they've also had to kill way more ska mistings than are actually ever descended from this guy, so, they've kind of, quote-unquote, made up for it, and this is the world of Mistborn, they're going to be on this for basically forever.
Even if they could prove definitively, we've done the same numbers, they'd be like, that's neat, but you did it in the first place. Penance, keep going.
Yeah.
This is a dark fantasy dystopia.
Yeah. So yeah, if ever a year goes by where they don't get enough bounties, they're all gonna die. We're gonna call the noble house Keldia.
That's a cool name.
As narrator, I would love this setup because it gives a lot of room for forcing compelling decisions on the characters. So maybe the year is coming swiftly to a close and the family is far behind the quota. Do the characters frame an innocent ska as a misting to save their own hides? Do they get a little more sloppy with their infiltrations and their desire to make their numbers? How do they handle it? What do they do if they find out a particularly useful misting NPC is actually a ska and not a nobleman? Do they sacrifice them, or risk not making their quota, or risk the wrath of the ministry if the NPC is ever found out and it becomes clear that the crew knew about them but did nothing? I mean, that's just two things off the top of my head that I can think of. So I think we've got a pretty good crew concept here. Okay, so that's step one in making a character, is altogether deciding what your crew is going to be. So after you've decided the crew, the next step two, is to devise a character concept. And this is a pretty straightforward step. You're basically just formalizing what idea you'll be using as you create the character. So you could do something like a pewter arm contract killer, or a rogue keeper, or any sort of just general idea of what is it that you have in mind as you're building this character. For step 3, there's 10 questions that you answer about the character that give you your traits and sort of flesh out your attributes. So the 10 questions are: why did you join the crew, which becomes your drive trait? How did you live before you joined the crew? This is your profession trait. What special skill do you bring to the crew? This is your specialty trait. What is your most distinctive feature? Now this can be like physical feature, personality quirk, manner of speech, etc. It's just the thing that if anyone spends any amount of time with you, this is what they'll remember about you. And that is your feature trait. The next question is, how do other people describe your personality? I really like this distinction, that it's what other people would describe your personality as. It's not what you think of yourself. It's what other people think of you. If you're, a really quiet, reserved person on the outside, for whatever reason, probably because this is a terrible place and you need to keep secrets, but like inside you're all bubbly and happy and it's really hard to contain yourself and be this quiet, reserved person, your personality trait would be quiet and reserved, not bubbly, happy person. What you quote unquote actually are doesn't matter for this. It's what other people see from you. Which, like I said, I just really like that distinction. So that's the first 5 questions. Questions 6, 7, and 8 are a series of questions about your powers, which are like your magic and stuff, your attributes, and your standings. Basically, attributes are like your attack stats, quote unquote, and standings are your defense stats, quote unquote. So you take these three areas, your powers, your attributes, and your standings, and you have to decide one each to be strong, average, and weak. So, for example, you might choose to have strong powers, average attributes, and weak standings, or maybe average powers and weak attributes and strong standings. Once you make those, in this step, all you do is decide average, weak, and strong. In steps down the line, we're going to actually flesh out those 3 things mechanically. The final 2 questions are, what is the worst thing that has ever happened to you? And what is your destiny? In the world of Mistborn, pretty much everyone's life sucks to one degree or another.
Even the nobility.
It is a bleak place.
I mean, the nobility are totally privileged, but still.
Yeah. So, one of the things you have to decide is what is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Was your mother caught in the crossfire and killed in a fight between allomancers of 2 unrelated noble houses? Were you beaten to an inch of your life to see if you snapped, which is what they call it when you're awakened to your powers. Basically, you have to go through a pretty life-threatening thing to actually activate your powers for the first time. And so there's this really toxic culture where people beat their children to within an inch of their lives to see if they have magic.
People usually meaning the nobility.
The Skas do it too, but
yeah, sure. But I mean, they're illegal, so less.
Yeah.
That's usually not going to come up.
Also, to be fair, Ska lives are so terrible that they probably are beaten to within an inch of their life anyway from the nobility. So.
Yeah, that's mostly a noble culture thing.
Yeah.
Which is why I say even the nobility's lives suck, even if they're privileged.
Yeah. So yeah, did you have to endure this beating? Maybe you watched your brother die in such an attempt. I mean, it's not actually often that somebody dies when they're trying to be awakened, but it does happen.
It's not unheard of.
Let's see. Were you imprisoned for years for some petty crime? Are you a Ska? Because honestly, just being a Ska sucks.
It implies a lot.
And implies a lot.
It implies at the very bare minimum, minimum food. You might not be starving, but you'll be close to it. And being beat up a lot and never being allowed to be happy ever.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Okay, so answering this question about tragedy is half the work that you do to help set up story threads for the narrator to weave your character into the campaign. It tells you what you are working to overcome. So the other question that you answer is what you believe your character's destiny to be. What do you want the end of your story to be? Now the narrator might veto some things here if you're wanting to do something that's just completely outside of the purview of what they have planned. But for the most part, narrators are pretty good at working with you. If you say what you want your destiny to be, they can say, yeah, okay, we can work towards that. So there can be things like if you're playing a keeper, which is a kind of magic user, do you want your character to discover a new Farukamul metal? If you're playing an outer city noble, do you think you'll elevate your family into a position of enough prominence to move into the capital city of Luthadel? If you're a Ska, do you think you'll lead a Ska rebellion and overthrow the corrupt government of an outlying city? Yeah.
Plausible.
I mean, if it's an outlying city, you might survive for a couple days before the Inquisitors and Kalas get there.
That's why no one would be stupid enough to do it in the first place. Just work with the narrator to make sure that what you want for your character is something that makes sense for their background and what they have set up for the campaign. Okay, so with the 10 questions out of the way, that's step 3. Step 4 is to fill out numerical values for the choices you made about powers, attributes, and standings. So we'll start with powers. If you chose strong powers, you can either become a keeper, which is a full Farukamist, or you can become a Mistborn. There's not necessarily any further choice to be made there at this point in the process with your powers, because keepers and Mistborn are defined by the fact that they can use all of the metals for their powers. If you have average powers, you can be either a Misting, which is somebody who can only use one type of metal in their allomancy instead of all of them, or you can become a Khandra, which are these really cool shapeshifter guys. If you're a Misting, you choose which of the metals you can burn, but you also, to balance out the fact that you only have one instead of all of them, you get to choose a stunt with your metal, which a stunt is like a extra special cool thing that you can do with the metal. Like you can have stunts that make it so you can burn metals for longer. You have stunts that can make things more effective in certain ways. Like for emotional allomancy, you can have a stunt that increases the radius that you can affect people at. So if you're a Misting, you get to choose which metal you want, as well as one stunt with that metal. If you're a Khandra, you get to choose which Khandra blessing you'll take from awareness, potency, presence, or stability. If you have weak powers, you don't have any magic, but you do get to choose 2 additional traits. And traits are, all these things that we've been answering questions about that are giving you traits. Basically, if a trait applies to a roll, then you get an extra die in that roll. Or sometimes if it negatively applies to the roll, you get a die taken away. So having extra traits just means that in certain rolls you'll get extra dice. Which is always nice. So I feel like that's a pretty good balance for, you still have weak powers because you don't have any magic, but, it's not totally worthless to have weak powers. Okay, so for attributes, let's talk about the attributes. There are 3 attributes. Your physique, which determines, how strong you are, how dexterous you are, how, It's like everything about your physical body. Then you have your charm, which is like your social stuff, like how good are you at talking with people, all that sort of stuff. And then you have your wits, which is, your mental capacity. I really like that this system is so simplified into, just these 3 attributes. You don't have to worry about, okay, is this actually an intelligence thing or is it a wisdom thing? And it's fun. It's fun to have that sort of thing in D&D, but it's also nice to have a system where it doesn't really matter if it's intelligence or wisdom. It's just your wits. It's kind of fun too, where physique. The thing about charisma is what's charisma? a lot of people's, and I've been joking, it's bra size or whatever. Or it can be the fact that you're hideous, but you're really clever, or whatever, or both, some mixture of the two. In this one, arguably, bra size would be physique. But if you're going for something that's along the lines of charisma, it's charm. And maybe part of your charm is part of your physicality, but it's just nice that it's a lot more clean cut and there's not that argument. And yes, technically, that's the way it is with charisma in D&D, but it's just nicer to me that it is a little bit more clean cut.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about if it's personality or if it's body or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just charm.
Yeah.
And you don't have to sit and explain it as much as you do often with charisma. Where even though people generally have an idea of what the definition of charisma is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when you're allocating points to your attributes, you can't put less than 2 points into any attribute. So every attribute will have at least 2 points. And the maximum is determined by what we chose. If you choose strong attributes, you have 13 points to allocate between the 3 stats, and no stat can be higher than 6. If you choose to have average attributes, you have 11 points, so 2 less points to allocate, and a maximum of 5 per attribute. And if you choose weak attributes, you have 9 points, so again 2 points less than the next higher up level, and nothing can exceed 4. And remember, these translate to the amount of dice you have for checks. So a maximum of 6 is actually a lot more than a maximum of 5, because every dice counts. Attributes are pretty simple. That you just get a number of points to allocate and a maximum that anything can have. Standings work similarly, just with higher caps, really. The 3 standings are resources, influence, and spirit. So resources is what it says on the tin. It's like, are you poor? Are you rich? And it's not necessarily even just strictly that. It's just, what is your ability to get the things that you need?
Because if you know a guy who knows a guy.
Yeah. The second one is influence. That pairs with your charm. It's like, doesn't matter if you are the most charismatic, the most charming person in the whole world. If you can't get in to talk to anyone because you're a nobody, it doesn't necessarily help you a whole lot. So,
or if you can get in to talk to somebody and you're nobody, it's going to set off red flags. Yeah.
So influence is like, what. It's like charm is like your aptitude in dealing with people, and influence is like your actual ability to influence people. Again, it's what it says on the tin. And then you have your spirit, which is like, how well do you deal with the soul-crushing reality of the terrible world that you live in? So again, with the standings, you have to assign at least 2 to each of the standings. With strong standings, you have 13 points to allocate again. But now, instead of having a maximum of 6, you have a maximum of 8. With average standings, you have 11, and none of them can be higher than 6. And with weak standings, you have 9 points to allocate, with none of them higher than 4. So that's step 4, is filling out those numbers. The 5th and final step is to fill out all the details. So here is where you choose your race. Sometimes, since you've already chosen what your powers are, sometimes your race is determined by what your powers were. Like, if you're a keeper, you have to be a terraceman. that sort of thing. So you do your race, your name, your age, your height, your weight, your gender, all that sort of stuff. Just filling out blanks on your character sheet. Then you calculate your resiliences. So your resiliences are basically like your health. In this game, you have 3 different kinds of health, essentially. There's just flat-out health, which you calculate by adding together your physique and your resources. This is the health that you use for, getting stabbed or being sick or, anything like that.
Or getting stabbed again.
So it's the normal health stuff. But there's also 2 other kinds of health, which I really like. So you have your reputation, which is your charm plus your influence. So this is things like, you're at a ball for the nobility and somebody just lays down one of the sickest burns ever. You're not going to take health damage, you're going to take reputation damage. Then your last resilience is your willpower, which is again you add across the row your wits plus your spirit. So like I said, different kinds of attack can reduce different resiliences. And the nice thing is when any of your resiliences is reduced to 0, then your character is removed from play in an appropriate way. So like, if your health is removed to 0, you fall unconscious and maybe you die. But if your reputation is reduced to 0, then like you might be run out of town and not be able to come back into town until you do something to fix your reputation. If your willpower reaches 0, then maybe you just collapse on the ground and say, what's the point of even doing anything anymore? The world is crap and my life is crap and I'm just gonna be over here, guys, I guess.
And or die. Dying is always an option.
Yeah. All right. Right. So the last thing that you do in character creation, besides writing a full backstory for your character to give to the narrator, if you want to do that, is to choose your props. Now, equipment works a little different in the Mistborn RPG. Unlike something like D&D, where you have your equipment and that's your equipment, and you keep track of your equipment and you do that. And you basically have it unless you lose it for some reason. The Mistborn RPG, you don't necessarily have any permanent equipment except for your props. Props are the permanent resources your character has. These are the things that you can always get back during long breaks unless the narrator has some narrative reason why you couldn't. But as a pro tip to narrators, it's kind of a dick move to not give your players their props back, unless you have a really damn good reason not to.
I mean, it could be a cool quest to go get the prop back, but you need to give the prop back eventually. Come on, man, it's a prop.
Yeah, and like, usually, personally as a narrator, the only reason I would not let somebody have their props back after a long rest is if they did something stupid to lose them. Then I might say, okay, yeah, now you gotta fix that mistake. But if they've been just playing normally, they should get their props back during long breaks. So, props can be things like metal vials for allomancers to burn.
Those are really important.
Metal mines for the keepers to be able to use their Furukami.
Arguably more important.
Like bones for Khandra.
Holy crap, these are important.
You can also do things like weapons, armor, shields, tools like lockpicks, maybe.
Okay, who cares about those?
Yeah, you can not give those props back. Nobody cares. Just kidding.
There's a table specifically that you can choose from, and you can choose an amount of props up to your resources score. So if you have 5 resources, you get 5 props. Some props cost more than one resource, or some props cost more than one resource to assign. This is for things that are not generally available to the public. So they're harder to get, so you have to spend more of your resources to be able to have that prop. And honestly, that's all there is to building a character in this game. It's simple, it's focused, and it doesn't take a long time. I like it. So there's one more thing that I want to talk about in this system before we leave off for this week, and that's character advancement. Characters in the Mistborn RPG don't really have levels at all. Level is not really a concept for it. The experience that you gain, which in this system are called advancements, it's given out for any number of things. Like, if you play really well in character, you might get an advancement. If you beat the big bad boss for the arc, you get some advancements. If you reveal a very powerful secret, because one of the things about Mistborn is that there's always another secret. That's kind of a thing about it. So if you reveal a powerful secret, you'll get some advancements. If you do something that harms your character but really advances the story for the rest of the group, you'd probably get advancements for that, etc., etc. Usually, as a narrator, what you do is you say, okay, if everyone plays normally, then this session they'll get this many advancements. Usually at least one per session, and usually no more than 3 per session. But then you say, okay, that's the baseline. Like, for this session, I'm going to do a baseline of 2 advancements. And if somebody does above and beyond what would be expected, they might get 3 or 4. If somebody just doesn't participate at all or is disruptive or anything, they might not get any.
It's this character getting so in character this player's getting so in character, burst into tears, really getting into it. Might be worth another advancement.
Yeah, and the thing is, since you don't have a level, it's okay if players have different numbers of advancements. It really is. So don't worry about that overly much. I mean, if it gets ridiculous, like if one character has gotten like 100 advancements and another character's gotten 5, then yeah, there's gonna be a problem there. But for the most part, it's not a big deal if there's different numbers of advancements. So advancements can only be spent during long breaks. So like in between jobs, essentially. And you spend them to improve your character. There's a lot of different things you can do with them. You can improve attributes, you can improve standings, and thereby also improve the corresponding resiliences, by the way. Or you can use it to improve your powers. You can gain new traits. You can alter traits you already have. Basically, anything you could have chosen at character creation can be taken or improved with advancements. Obviously different things cost different numbers of advancements. It takes a lot less advancements to, say, improve one of your attributes than to, from a character who had no powers, suddenly snap into a Mistborn. Those take different numbers of advancements. Anywhere from 2 to 20. Which is also important because you can only ever have 20 advancements at a time. If you have 19 and you haven't spent them for some reason, and you get 3 of them, well, 2 of them were just lost because you only can have 20 at a time. So that's another thing to look at, is things that cost 20 advancements are really powerful, but you also have to be really careful in how you plan saving up 20 advancements, because you don't want to lose any. And with that, we've gone over the basics for the Mistborn RPG system. I'm really excited to build some characters for our little crew. Thanks again to LEigh for drawing for us. You can find her on Instagram at LEigh the Wordsmith, and you can read her webcomic about 5 villains seeking something better at monochromecomic.com. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Normal YouTube stuff. If you liked it, like, comment, tell your friends, subscribe, and all that. And be sure not to miss out next week. when we build a noble woman who can see the future. And until then, keep those forges lit.